I never imagined that installing solar panels would spark a full-blown war with my neighborhood, but that's exactly what happened. When I moved to Sunnyside Estates last spring, life seemed perfect. Birds chirping, neighbors smiling, my energy bill plummeting thanks to my new solar array. Everything felt right. Until I met her, Karen Thompson. She wasn't just a neighbor. She was the self-appointed queen of our HOA, armed with a clipboard and a glare that could curdle milk. It started innocently enough. A letter tucked into my mailbox, stamped with the Sunnyside Estates HOA letterhead but suspiciously unsigned. Dear homeowner, your recent installation does not comply with neighborhood aesthetic guidelines. Please remove within 7 days. I frowned. I had submitted all the proper paperwork. I had received official approval from the architectural committee. Something didn't add up. Determined to clear the air, I decided to attend the next HOA meeting. That's when I saw her in person. Karen in full regalia. Aggressively layered bob haircut, designer sunglasses perched atop her head indoors, and a death grip on a clipboard like it contained nuclear launch codes. She ran the meeting like a dictator, cutting people off mid-sentence, dismissing concerns with a flick of her manicured nails. When my turn came, she leveled her gaze at me, her voice sickly sweet. Mr. Rivera, she said, those solar panels simply won't do. They're an eyesore and diminish property values. I calmly produced my approval documents. Her face flushed an angry red. Well, she snapped, I wasn't at that meeting, and as HOA president I have final say. Take them down by next week or face daily fines. I stood my ground. The panels were legal, eco-friendly, and officially approved. A few neighbors even nodded in support. Karen's knuckles turned white around her clipboard. Without a word, she abruptly called a bathroom break. And when the meeting resumed, she skipped my agenda item altogether and adjourned early. I went home thinking that was the end of it. If only I'd known then what Karen was truly capable of. 3 days later, I returned from a short business trip and immediately knew something was wrong. My driveway looked normal. The lawn was freshly mowed. But when I glanced up at the roof, my heart dropped. 2 of my solar panels were completely shattered, jagged like broken teeth, and the rest had been disconnected, hanging uselessly from their mounts. Taped to my front door was a note, written in shaky block letters. Now they definitely need to be removed. Management. Nwagawalog. No official signature. Just management. As if that would somehow erase the fact that this was outright vandalism. But Karen had underestimated me. Not only am I an environmental enthusiast, I'm also a security consultant. Before I even moved in, I'd installed a full-coverage security system, motion sensors, night vision cameras, the works. I rushed inside, heart pounding, and pulled up the footage. And there she was, clear as day, 3:07 p.m., dressed in a tennis outfit, Karen Thompson herself marching across my lawn. She carried a stepladder and what looked like a garden rake. I watched, stunned, as she propped the ladder against my house, climbed up with surprising agility, and swung the rake like a battering ram into my solar panels. Shards rained down with every blow. When 2 panels were destroyed, she methodically disconnected the wiring on the others, pausing only to wipe the sweat from her brow. All of it captured in crystal-clear high definition. And she hadn't even bothered to cover her face. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Instead, I did exactly what I was trained to do. I documented everything. First, I filed a claim with my insurance company. Damage estimates came back at over $7,000, enough to classify this as a felony. Then, I filed a police report and contacted a lawyer friend for advice. The police were interested but urged me to work it out with the HOA first. My lawyer wasn't as forgiving. This isn't an HOA issue, he said bluntly. It's criminal damage to property. Press charges. Still, part of me hoped we could settle it civilly. Maybe Karen just needed a reminder of the consequences. The next evening, I printed out several high-resolution screenshots from the footage, slipped them into an envelope, and walked to Karen's house. She answered the door, wearing a smug little smirk that vanished the second she saw me. Without a word, I handed her the envelope. "What's this supposed to be?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Just some paperwork regarding my solar panels," I said calmly. "Thought you'd want to see it before tomorrow's special HOA meeting." I turned and walked away as she ripped open the envelope. Behind me, I heard a strangled gasp, the first crack in her carefully curated armor. But the best was yet to come. The next morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Please call me. We need to discuss restitution. Karen Thompson." I didn't reply. Some lessons need to be learned the hard way. That evening, Sunnyside Estates held an emergency HOA meeting, one I had personally requested. Word had spread fast. By the time I arrived, the meeting room was packed, every seat taken, neighbors lining the walls, murmuring in hushed, excited tones. Karen was already there, but not in her usual position at the head of the table. Instead, she sat hunched in a corner, eyes darting around the room, nervously clutching her ever-present clipboard like a life preserver. The vice president, a wiry man named Steve who usually deferred to Karen, cleared his throat and called the meeting to order. "We have some serious matters to address tonight," he said awkwardly. He gestured for me to begin. I stood up, heart hammering, but my voice came out calm and steady. I explained everything, how I had submitted the proper paperwork, how the panels were approved by the committee, how they had been vandalized. I handed out copies of the approval documents and photographs of the damage. Then, for the grand finale, I pulled out a remote and turned on the projector. The wall lit up with the security footage. There, in full color and crystal clarity, the entire room watched Karen Thompson, tennis skirt, garden rake, and all, as she destroyed my property with a look of gleeful determination. You could have heard a pin drop. When the footage ended, the room remained frozen for a long moment. Then, every head slowly turned to Karen. Her face was bloodless. She tried to recover, straightening her spine and forcing a thin, strained smile. "It's not what it looks like," she said, voice cracking. "Those panels were installed incorrectly. They were a safety hazard. I was trying to prevent a fire." The vice president shook his head. "Karen, you're not an electrician. You never filed any safety complaint. You acted completely outside of protocol." For a moment, it seemed like Karen might try to fight back. But then something unexpected happened. One by one, my neighbors started speaking up. The Patels shared how Karen had fined them for growing non-compliant vegetables that didn't match the community image. The Johnsons described receiving threats of penalties because their trash bins stayed out 2 hours too long. Even Mrs. Abernathy, a sweet widow in her 70s, stood up, her voice shaking with emotion, to tell how Karen had harassed her over a simple bird feeder. The floodgates opened. Story after story poured out, years of quiet resentment finally bursting free. Meanwhile, Karen sat frozen, her fingers furiously texting under the table, growing more frantic by the second. Then the doors to the meeting room slammed open. A man in an expensive suit stormed in, face flushed with fury. Karen's husband, a local attorney I recognized from billboard ads around town. "Nobody say another word," he barked. "This meeting is over." He grabbed Karen's arm and tried to haul her toward the door. But they weren't going anywhere. Not this time. Before Karen and her husband could flee, 2 uniformed police officers stepped into the doorway, blocking their path. "Karen Thompson?" one officer said, his voice calm but firm. Karen froze, clutching her clipboard like a shield. Slowly, she nodded. "We have a warrant for your arrest on charges of criminal damage to property," the officer continued, already reaching for his handcuffs. The room, packed wall to wall with my neighbors, fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the shuffling of feet and the crackle of a police radio. Karen's husband immediately switched tactics, puffing out his chest and throwing up a hand. "This is a misunderstanding," he barked, trying to sound authoritative. My wife was acting in the best interest of the community. We demand this be handled civilly." The officers barely blinked. One of them began reciting Karen's rights in a monotone voice, clearly unbothered by the husband's protests. He moved with the kind of mechanical efficiency that comes from processing hundreds of arrests, and knowing when a situation wasn't going to get any better. Karen sputtered, mascara starting to stream down her cheeks, her usual polished image crumbling right there in front of everyone. As the officers turned her toward the door, she snapped her head around to glare at me. "Do you know who I am in this community?" she shrieked. "This will never stand. I'll ruin you for this." I didn't flinch. I didn't say a word. I didn't have to. Everyone had already seen who Karen really was, and no amount of bluster could undo it now. Her husband stumbled after her, barking into his phone, likely calling every contact he had, but it was no use. Through the meeting room windows, we all watched as Karen was placed into the back of a police cruiser, her pristine tennis skirt wrinkled, her clipboard abandoned on the sidewalk. Inside the meeting room, Steve, the vice president, cleared his throat again. "Given recent events," he said carefully, "I move that we vote on new HOA leadership effective immediately."
No hesitación. No debate.
The vote was unanimous. Karen was officially removed from her position as HOA president. As Steve scribbled down the results, Karen's forgotten phone, left buzzing frantically on the table, lit up with a new notification. Curious, Steve glanced at the screen and let out a short, disbelieving laugh. "Looks like the country club board has seen the footage too," he said. "They've revoked her membership." For a moment, there was stunned silence. Then spontaneous applause broke out. Genuine, relieved applause. Some neighbors even cheered. The reign of terror was over. Watching that police cruiser pull away, I felt a strange mix of emotions. Satisfaction? Sure, but also an unexpected sense of sadness. It didn't have to end this way. Karen could have chosen a different path. She could have been the leader she so desperately pretended to be. Instead, she let pride, power, and petty control turn her into someone no one could defend. Not even herself. The days that followed felt lighter, like the entire neighborhood had been holding its breath for years without realizing it, and could finally exhale. Without Karen's iron grip, things started to change. Neighbors who once barely waved now stopped to chat. The Patel family expanded their garden with colorful peppers and herbs. Mrs. Abernathy put her bird feeder back up and smiled when kids came by to watch the sparrows. For the first time since moving to Sunnyside Estates, I actually felt like I belonged here. The new HOA leadership, with Steve reluctantly stepping in as interim president, moved quickly to repeal several of Karen's more ridiculous policies. Fines were reduced, meetings became real conversations instead of monologues, and people began repairing the small cracks that years of fear and resentment had left behind. As for me, my insurance covered the damages to my solar panels, and the company even expedited the replacement at no extra cost, calling it a case study in neighborhood resilience. Karen's criminal case proceeded quietly in the background. Her attorney husband pulled every string he could, but vandalism backed by high-definition footage and multiple eyewitnesses wasn't something even the best lawyers could bury. I heard through the grapevine that Karen had been fined heavily and was required to perform community service, ironically cleaning public spaces she once thought herself too good to touch. Last I saw her, she was picking up litter at the edge of town, avoiding eye contact with passing cars. There was no final confrontation, no grand apology, just a quiet ending. Fitting, really, for someone who had spent so long yelling into silence. As I sit here now, watching the sunlight glint off my newly repaired solar panels, I realize that sometimes standing your ground isn't just about protecting your property. It's about protecting your dignity. It's about reminding people like Karen that no one, no matter how loud or powerful they seem, is above the rules. Sunnyside Estates isn't perfect. No place is. But it's ours now, not just hers. And that's a victory worth every shattered panel, every sleepless night, every risk taken. Because sometimes the only way to fix what's broken is to refuse to be broken yourself.